My name's Jo. I am a primary teacher, EAL specialist. I am also a content writer for the EAL resources here at Twinkl. And when I'm not doing that, I work for a teacher training provider as well. So that's a little bit about me. This evening, we're going to be looking at scaffolding for EAL learners to help them access the curriculum and to reach ambitious goals. So just run you through the sorts of things that we're going to be looking at this evening. So we're going to start by looking at a definition of scaffolding, what that might look like and why it's important. I've got some strategies to talk you through in relation to scaffolding talk. So we'll look at those. Also some strategies and resources to look at to scaffold generally in your classrooms and in your different settings, and also a bit of information about how we can encourage our learners to self-scaffold. That's a really important skill for them to develop. Going to look at how we can incorporate the use of home languages into our classrooms, and I'm going to signpost you to loads of different Twinkl resources, but also some other resources as well. So I hope that it's informative. I hope most importantly that you get something that you can take away and implement in your classrooms with your children. Just before we get started, maybe just a quick thumbs up if you're in kind of early years, Key Stage 1 setting. Yeah, a few hands there. Great, lovely to have you here. Key Stage 2. Yeah, a few more in Key Stage 2, fab. And anybody in Key Stage 3, 4, 5 in secondary as well? Great. Okay, that's great, because here at Twinkl we're working quite hard to develop our resources across the age range. So it's great to see people from loads of different settings and different age groups. So I hope that all of you find something useful to take away and implement, and we get going. Okay, so we'll start by looking at what scaffolding is. So scaffolding is a temporary support that we put in place to support a learner to reach an ambitious goal or work at a higher level. So the way I like to think about it is always kind of imagining the scaffolding that goes up alongside a building when buildings are being built, and they put the scaffolding in place to help them build the building all the way to the top, and then as they don't need it anymore, the scaffolding is then gradually removed. So that's a really important thing for us to think about when we're thinking about scaffolding in our classroom, because as our learners become more proficient and confident, it's important that we reduce the scaffolding and that we take it away gradually, obviously not all at once, but we gradually remove it, perhaps bit by bit, which then enables them to work more independently. And that's something that's really important for our learners of EAL. We want them to develop their confidence in our classrooms. We want them to develop their independence as well. So that's kind of how I think of it, and the analogy that I use. It's really important that us as teachers and staff in school have got high expectations of all our learners, and that's no different for our learners of EAL. I think sometimes it can be challenging because they might not be displaying the levels of English required to communicate how much knowledge they've got around a subject, or how familiar they are with a concept. And I often, when I used to lead EAL in school, I'd often get teachers come and say to me, oh, they can't do this and they're struggling with that, and I think this is going to be too hard for them. And I'd always kind of challenge that a little bit and say, yeah, but they might not have the English, but that doesn't mean they haven't got the cognitive abilities to access the concepts and the subject and the vocabulary. So it's really important that we keep our expectations for our EAL learners really, really high, just as we do for any of our learners. And that's something to think about when we're thinking about scaffolding and working with EAL learners. Don't give them something simple because they haven't got the English. They haven't got the English yet, and it's our job to help us get that English. So scaffolding will help us and help them to reach higher kind of goals, maybe more ambitious than you'd maybe originally planned for. And that can be quite difficult sometimes to get your head around when they're not presenting, especially when they're new arrivals and they're very new to English, when they're not presenting you with the language in English. But it doesn't mean that they haven't got the cognitive abilities, and it doesn't mean they haven't come across that material before. So it's really important that we set our expectations high. We talk about having an assets-based approach. So we know that our EAL learners bring huge skills to our classroom. Being able to speak one language, two languages, multiple languages is an asset, it's a skill, and it's something that we should celebrate. And I think that often in later life as adults, we really celebrate those of us that can speak a number of different languages. But I think sometimes in school that can be lost a little bit, and children feel perhaps that they need to speak just English at school. Or sometimes I know that I used to work with parents who would say, I want them just to learn English. I'm going to stop speaking their home language with them at home. And my message to them was, please don't do that. It's really important that they're getting as much language as possible. It's so important. So an assets-based approach recognises all the skills and talents that our EAL learners bring. And if we're working with that kind of assets-based approach, I think that helps us to set our expectations high, or that bit higher, for our EAL learners. We have got a podcast. I don't know if you see them on Twinkl. They are called Talking Their Language. So they are all with Helen Bodell, who's on the call as well. These are a number of podcasts that we've done. There's a specific series that's called Why It Works, which I do with Dr. Rob Sharples, who's lecturer at Bristol Uni, and he specialises in EAL. And we've done a series of podcasts on lots of different themes, but one we've done on scaffolding is episode 11. So the link should be coming to you. You can click on it. It's completely free for you to access. So if you wanted to learn a bit more about scaffolding and different ideas after this, then that might be a great place to start off with. I quite like playing them in the car on my way home from school. Okay, so moving on, we're going to look at scaffolding talk. So I think this is something we do as educators really naturally. We do it all the time, so we'll often repeat things back, echo things back, so that other children can hear. Sometimes if a response isn't quite accurate, we might recast it and rephrase it so that we're modelling the correct grammar or the correct vocabulary. And we ask questions. We ask questions all the time as teachers. So we're scaffolding talk in that way in our everyday practice. And it's probably something we don't necessarily think about so much. But these strategies are things that maybe something else you can put in place to support talk in your classroom. It's really important that our EAL learners have opportunities to talk in partners, in trios or triads sometimes. Any way that they can get a good model of English is really important for them to hear. And then if they can hear a couple of people before they speak, they've heard a couple of examples and a couple of models before they've had opportunity themselves to have a go. So that's really important. I know lots of schools I work in do table talk. Children are encouraged to talk on their tables. Children are numbered sometimes, and then different numbers are pulled out of a pot to respond to a question. Any way that you can incorporate opportunities for talk in your classroom are hugely valuable for our learners of EAL. So first example then are some worked examples. So I've pulled out these. So all these links, if they're from Twinkl, they should be coming to you in the chat. So these are some worked examples in terms of modelling conversation. So you can see on there, you've got the question and you've got the answer. That's really helpful for them to hear you model that, but then also for them to have a go. So lots of different kind of conversation cards that have got the examples on there for them to follow. We've also got sentence starters and gap fills. So these are some things I just made. I used to have them around my board at school. So these are also on Twinkl as well. So kind of just, what is your favourite sport? My favourite sport is. So you're not giving them all of the answer, but you're scaffolding them and you're kind of managing that cognitive load and you're just guiding them in the right direction. So again, any kind of resources you can use that do that are really helpful. Same with that one. What did you have lunch? The gaps in the middle, so that they know you've given them some of the language that they need, but then you're asking them then to think of some language for themselves, but they're not overwhelmed by that because you've given them some of what they need. They're also available. These ones I did for myself. So these are just sentence stems. You're probably really familiar with these. You can use them in loads of different subjects. I used to have them all around my board at school. And we used to use them for loads of different subjects. This was one we used to use for maths. I know it can't be something because something. And then again, you're scaffolding them, you're giving them something, you're giving them a bit of a structure and a bit of a clue, but you're also encouraging them to think of the answer for themselves and put that information in there. And these are great for speaking. They can also be really useful for writing. All of these strategies can be good for writing as well, because they're speaking and writing are both productive skills. This one I had in music. Music made me feel something because something, and I just would have them kind of around my board, around my room, so that children could refer to them all the time. And obviously with these, the more you use them and the more the children know that you're going to expect that kind of answer from them, the more embedded they become, and the children use them kind of without you prompting. Another strategy, I suppose, that relates to this is encouraging them to, this comes from the Walkthroughs book by Tom Sherrington. It's called Say It Again Better. So that is a strategy where you might not necessarily accept their first answer. You're going to praise something that comes in their first answer, and then maybe ask them to, can they rephrase it? Can they think of a better way of saying it? Because they change one of the words. And if you can bounce that back to them and then come back to them a little bit later, that's again about setting those high expectations. Same with if you've asked for an answer in a full sentence and you just get a word, if you let the word go and it's not in a full sentence, then you're not going to get that next time. So it's setting those expectations really high. These are a really easy way of doing that for speaking, I found. And then finally, I don't know if you have seen any of these, maybe give me a thumbs up if you've come across these. These are called substitution tables. One, thank you, JC. A few. Great, I'm really pleased that some of you have seen these. They kind of come from a language teaching background, I think. I never learned about them when I was doing my teacher training. I learned about them when I was doing a course to teach English language to adults. But they're really, really useful. So again, these are on Twinkl, so you can download these or you can make your own. You adapt them to the topic, and you're guiding the children to make a choice. So they just work from left to right across the table, making the choice from the vocabulary that is presented to them. You make them as simple or as complicated as you like. So you can see the one on the left has got some illustrations, whereas the one on the right is the same. It's the same table without them. I've seen people add audio to them. I've seen people use widgets with them. I've seen some people translate kind of keywords. The only thing I'd say to be wary of with don't translate the whole thing, because obviously different languages follow different grammar structures and they're not always going to be the same as English. So just be wary of that. But for the odd keyword that might be really challenging, I've seen people use translations on there really effectively as well. So there's loads of different ways that you can use these. Make them as simple or as complicated as you like. And one of the ways I used them a lot in the beginning to build children's confidence and to build their independence was to give them choices where they'd all make accurate sentences. So I was deliberately choosing things that I knew would enable them to build an accurate sentence. And then they were really pleased because they'd been able to say a sentence, write a sentence, build a sentence. So it's about building that confidence and independence. I've also seen them where you can make them a bit more open. So you might give them the first few columns and then you might just have a because, and then just a blank space, and then obviously they have to go away and think about what they can add on the end. So all of those strategies are really effective for scaffolding talk, and hopefully they're ones that you've seen before, but if not, hopefully they can. You might want to take a couple and incorporate them into your practice. Okay. So some are the different strategies and resources to help with scaffolding. So all these are Twinkl resources, but the strategies I'm going to talk through obviously are strategies that you can use throughout your classroom, throughout your subjects, with resources that you've made or that you've got from anywhere else. So the first one is pre-teaching. Thumbs up if you do pre-teaching. Really effective. Tracy's quickest off the button. Thank you, Tracy. Yeah, really effective strategy for working with EAL learners and really good for scaffolding. So pre-teaching, just really quickly, is when you expose your learners to language and concepts that are coming up. Particularly good if you're going to be working on a topic for a long time. So if you can pre-teach vocabulary or a story or concepts, that's really, really helpful. If they've been exposed to it before, so that then when they get to your lesson, they're not completely overwhelmed by all the language and the ideas that you're throwing out there at them. Sometimes I used to send different resources home. That can be quite a good way. If you've got a TA, maybe something that they can work on with them. If not, I've done it with kind of children just playing different games with vocabulary or different activities that you put together that you know that you've targeted the language for the language that's coming up in your future lesson. So pre-teaching is a brilliant way of scaffolding, particularly if you're working, when I think of some of the subjects and the vocabulary that children are expected to learn and we're expected to teach them, it's really, really high, even in the younger years. When I go in and watch lots of lessons in my other role, I'm fortunate enough to be able to do that, and it never fails to kind of amaze me, the level of language we're teaching our children at such a young age. So any way that they can be exposed to that before your lesson, particularly if it's going to be a series of lessons on a particular topic, that can be really helpful. Something else you can do then, if you've done that, is then they can become the experts in your lesson. So I've seen this work really effectively. I've done this a lot. Because you pre-taught them that vocabulary, you can involve them then in a little bit of teaching, and suddenly they feel like they're the experts. And I think for particularly some of our new arrivals, I wonder how often they feel like that in our classroom. So I think that's a really important thing to consider. So pre-teaching is great. Graphic organisers. So this is, these can be used two ways really. So it's thinking about how we present information to the children. So if we're presenting information that's just text, you know, that's really quite overwhelming and challenging perhaps for some of them to access. So if we can break that information down, perhaps present it in a more visual way on a graphic organizer, that can be really helpful. And then equally, when we're asking for children to produce a piece of work, again, if we're giving them a piece of blank paper and saying, you know, write a story, write this, do this, draw this, whatever it is, that's really quite difficult. So if we can break it down and organize it in a more of a visual way, that's really, really helpful. And these strategies, by the way, are great for scaffolding EAL learners. They're also brilliant for all the children in your class. So yeah, graphic organisers are a great one. Gap fills. So the two examples we've got here. So we've got kind of a younger version and then an older learners version. Something we're trying to work hard on at Twinkl at the minute is making resources that are age appropriate for our children is really important. So again, you're giving them a lot of the information. So in these ones, they've got to fill in the right verb. They've got the verb at the top and they've got a visual to go with it. You're giving them a sentence and they just need to fill in the verb. So again, you're managing that cognitive load. It's not too overwhelming and they are going to be able to be successful at doing that. So you build things up slowly, but all of these things kind of can scaffold that. They might not have been able to do that if they haven't got something in place that helps them. I think in previous years, we've thought about in teaching, certainly when I think about my career, we've thought about differentiation and having kind of 3 different levels of activities and things. I think that's something that we're moving more away from. I think we're talking more about adaptive teaching and ways that we can adapt our teaching to meet the needs of the children in our class, and scaffolding is doing is doing exactly that. So there's some strategies there, and then there's some other ones here. So again, substitution tables we've talked about. Again, make them as complicated or as simple as you like. Really useful. We've got some grammar support packs. Now, this is an area we know that our EAL learners can find challenging, often because the grammar structures in their language are so different to those in English. So we've produced lots of grammar support packs. These ones are on comparatives and superlatives. And again, they're full of these activities that I've talked to you about. There's games, there's kind of opportunities for them to practice, loads of different activities that are scaffolding them to work at a bit of a higher level than perhaps if you just asking them to work on some more traditional activities. So they're available. You can see we've got younger learners, older learners version. So we've got those and lots of different topics on the site. And then these scaffolding packs. So again, a bit like the grammar support packs, these ones are based on the seasons, and they're full of these different activities that scaffold and give opportunities for children to practice that target language. And they're available on our site. Now we have got these, some new scaffolding packs coming soon. So I'll talk you through that in a little minute when I get on to a future slide. So look out for those because they're a new edition that are coming to Twinkl soon. Okay, so moving on then. So games are an amazing way to scaffold learning and provide opportunities for children to practice the target language. We've got loads of different games available. I've just pulled out some different ones here. So the noughts and crosses, that's got phrasal verbs on it. It's got lots of different versions on it. So you pull out the one that you need. And again, you're giving them some of the language that they need. And then when they've got that language, you're gradually removing the scaffolding so that they have to think of that language for themselves and put it in a sentence. Same with the talking games and activity packs, lots of different activities in there. Some of the ones I've already showed you already to scaffold the learning. And we've also got lots of interactive games available on site now for EAL, which is really exciting. So lots of matching, multiple choice, spot the mistake, all these sorts of games available on the website. So that's really helpful as well. So there's lots of kind of different strategies you can use in your classroom, lots of different resources, lots of different ways that you can scaffold the learning for your children. And I think if you can make it as different and as creative and as fun as possible, I think it's just going to engage them better. Okay, so just going to talk you through self-scaffolding. So the EEF do loads of really good research. Thumbs up if you've heard of the EEF. I think lots of their research is used increasingly in schools now. Yeah, great, thank you. So this is a report that they did on making the best use of TAs, and they devised a scaffolding framework for TA and pupil interactions. But I actually think it's a really helpful one for us to look at as any adult working with children in the classroom. So I'll talk you through that in a minute. When we're talking about self-scaffolding, we're thinking about children being a bit more independent and being able to scaffold themselves. So think about the resources in your classroom. So this is a resource I used to have on my working wall, and I used to direct the children to look at the working wall and use that as a tool to help them. There's 30 of them, there's only one of me. But also it's developing that independence. So I'd have various working walls for various subjects around my classroom, and I'd try and have the vocabulary, try and have examples of the work, examples of their work that they could refer to. And I'd try and almost teach them to kind of come up with a list of things that they would do before they'd kind of put their hand up and ask for help, or before they'd just sit there and stop. Because I think that's really important. So this post is a helpful one for that. So C3 before me. So it's encouraging them to think of ways that they can support themselves with their own learning, rather than just, like I said, getting stuck or distracting or giving up, or putting their hands up, or whatever it is they do. So I think that's a really helpful one. And the piece of research that relates to these then from the EEF and there's a link to this in the chat if you can't quite see it. They came up with this kind of triangle around self-scaffolding, and they wanted self-scaffolding to be the thing that adults did first with the children. So they'd maybe ask them some kind of questions. Oh, what do you think you need to do? What could you do here? What does it say? Whereas if you go to the other end of the triangle, the first thing that often they found that staff would often do is kind of jump in and try and kind of correct and try and complete the task with the children kind of as quickly as possible. They thought that you know, with this group of children, I kind of want them to do well, and that's the steps I'm going to take. But so to avoid that, they devised this triangle and they set it so that self-scaffolding is the first thing. So you encourage the children to be more independent. Then you might move down to the prompt. So you might give them a bit of a prompt, a bit of a clue to help them kind of understand for themselves. And then as you go down, then you might need to model it. You might need to become a bit more involved. But I saw this and I thought it was really, really interesting, and it made me reflect on my practice in the classroom. And I thought, actually, if I can stand back and ask those kind of self-scaffolding questions first before I jump in to my cluing or my modelling, then actually probably the children can get there with maybe less help than I'm expecting to give them. And again, it's setting those high expectations. And then the children begin to learn that you're not going to do the work for them. They need to take some ownership, they need to develop their independence, and they need to have a go for themselves. So it's a really interesting piece of research. It's got a big report that goes with it. It's then got the poster that the EEF do really nicely. So they've made, I think, 8 recommendations. That's all in an A4 poster. So if you follow the link for this resource, or you Google EEF, you'll find the report and the piece of research that went alongside that. But I thought it was quite a nice one when I'm thinking about scaffolding. Okay, moving on then to using children's home languages. So this is so important, and this is something I'm so passionate about. So we know that speaking multiple languages is a skill, it's an asset. We know being bilingual or multilingual has got so many benefits. And we also know that linking learning to prior knowledge is really helpful. And that's something we often start most of our lessons with. We'll recap something, we'll link back to something, we'll try and reactivate some prior knowledge. If you've heard of Rosenshine's principles, that's one of his principles alongside scaffolding, funnily enough. So we know all that is helpful. So if we know all those things, I feel, and I'm really passionate about creating a safe environment in our classrooms where our children feel able to use the different languages that they have, feel encouraged to use them, want to use them, and understand a little bit more about how using the languages that they have can help them with their English acquisition as well. I just think it helps them to feel really valued if we can do this in our classrooms. And it's hard because lots of teachers will come and say to me, yeah, but if we do that, we don't know what they're saying, or we don't know what they're writing necessarily, and they're maybe a little bit reluctant to let go of that control. But I think it's really important that we do give children the opportunities to use their languages in our classrooms. I think if we can model it with some of our adults, that's really helpful. I just feel it's so important. So these resources are different ways of incorporating home languages into your classroom. So sometimes it's referred to as translanguaging. So that's when you're giving children the opportunity to work with all the languages they have and kind of work between them and help them make connections. So there's loads of graphic organisers in that pack that have got specific spaces for children to make notes in their home language, make links between English and their home languages. Same again with that Diwali glossary. It's just a space for them to write down the words in English, and then think about the connections to their home languages if they're literate in their home language. So there's lots of different resources there that promote that. sometimes I think it's important to give children, particularly in maths, some word problems in their own language maybe, or alongside them in English, so that they can help them to develop that vocabulary. The vocabulary in maths, word problems particularly, is something they find quite challenging. And though a lot of the time teachers will say to me, yeah, the numbers, come easier, it's a bit more universal, and they pick up on the maths. When it comes to the vocabulary and word problems, I think we need to be really conscious at how we're presenting those to our children. So if we can allow them an opportunity to use their home languages, I think that is so important. I think about your displays as well around your classroom. I always ask my trainees, how many languages are spoken in your classroom? And they'll quite often say, yeah, we've got 10, 11, 12, 15 different languages in our classroom. And then the next question I ask them is, how many languages are displayed in your classroom? And then the numbers tend to fall. So I think if we can open that up a little bit and encourage children to be using their languages, if they can see their languages being used, being displayed, being valued, I think that's a massive kind of gateway into supporting them with their learning. Also makes them feel really, really valued as well, which I think is hugely important. So I'm a huge advocate of using different languages in the classroom, and there's some resources there that will support you with that. Okay, I already mentioned the scaffolding podcast, and that we are also on all of these social media platforms, so you can follow us on there. And then this is what I mentioned earlier. So these are coming soon. So these are curriculum scaffolding packs for both younger and older learners. We've started with history, geography and science subjects. We've got Roman, space and rivers coming March the 11th, I believe, I'm told by Helen. So look out for these. These are coming onto the site. They include lots of the strategies and the resources that I've shared with you already into these different packs. So these are coming, and we hope that they will help you to help your children access some of the foundation subjects a little bit more easily. So please do look out for them. They are coming soon. I think there's going to be a big campaign around them, so you shouldn't miss them. And then in terms of signposting you to other places, because I know lots of people don't necessarily have an EAL lead or a named kind of person responsible for the learning of for EAL learners in their school. So I think sometimes if you are the EAL lead, or even if you're a teacher just trying to, implement effective strategies to support your EAL learners, it can be quite overwhelming, quite lonely place to go. So these are some different resources that you might find particularly kind of helpful, kind of external to your school and to Twinkl. So first of all, I'll advise you to go to your local network. So have you got an EAL or an inclusion lead? Great, in your school. Have you got one in your trust or your MAT, or is there any support available at your local authority? So I'm really, really fortunate the area I work in still has a really strong EAL team. We actually have a lending library for EAL resources. But I'm also aware when I speak to colleagues across the country that is quite a rare occurrence, and these teams are gradually disappearing. So find out what support there is locally, and if there's anything like that you can join or get involved in, it's really, really good. The book Scaffolding Language, Scaffolding Learning by Pauline Gibbons is really, really good book. It's got loads of different strategies for scaffolding, loads of ways to support your learners with their language. Highly recommend that one. The Bell Foundation are a great charity that champion EAL learners. They've got loads of research and resources on there, so definitely worth checking out if you haven't come across them before. And NALDIC are the National Association for EAL. So that journal that you can see on there, that's one of the publications that they send out. I think they send them out termly. You pay to be a member. I think it's free for trainees, but they're and they do really good conferences and things. So there's some really good resources to be had there. The EEF I've mentioned already. They publish lots of good good resources. That one is the link to the scaffolding research that I shared earlier. And then just at the bottom, I've written an article for the Chartered College around EAL, called It's Easier to Be What You Can See. So again, it's that idea that if you can see these languages being used around you, you're going to be more confident to use them yourselves. So again, if you follow that link, it's free, it's online, probably take 5 minutes to read it. So lots of different resources there that I hope are useful. I really hope that you come away with something tangible that you can take back to your classroom and to your setting, perhaps share with your colleagues as well. Yeah, and I think that's everything for me. So thank you for listening.